Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Before I start this presentation, I'd like to ask you to pay attention to this slide. Have you ever heard of food politics? Do you know that there is a practice of diplomacy using food? If you don't, then you miss an interesting subject in international relations study. There is a way that many countries do to promote themselves at the global level through their signature food called gastrodiplomacy. It was emerged after the Cold War, where international relations are largely affected by non-traditional issues. One of them is globalization. It has developed people's mindset, including their view about food that considered healthy. There was a trend where the Western food began to be regarded as unhealthy. It led people to search for new healthy food options and turn to Eastern countries. The attraction of non-Western food be used by middle power countries to gaining attention from international community. Today, I'd like to present 3 points related to gastrodiplomacy. To start with, I will explain the purposes of gastrodiplomacy. Then I will mention some countries that do gastrodiplomacy. After that, I will explain the benefits from doing gastrodiplomacy. Finally, I will summarize this presentation. First, I want to talk about the aims of gastrodiplomacy. It is part of public diplomacy, which is focused on public affairs in order to form an opinion that can later be used for national interest or future foreign policy. Gastrodiplomacy is also done for other aims, such as economic goals in developing food industry and expanding food companies, introducing state culture, and distinguishing themselves from other countries, especially if they are surrounded by strong countries or in a strategic region. Within just only one type of diplomacy, there are many goals for diverse fields that each country wants to achieve. Now I'm going to mention some countries that do gastrodiplomacy. Actually, a lot of countries do this type of diplomacy, but the countries that I will mention later are the examples of international relations actors who did systematic and well-planned gastrodiplomacy. It was first used by Thailand in 2002. Thailand's first public diplomacy was through a culinary system called Thailand Kitchen of the World, which was conducted by expanding over thousands of Thai food restaurants around the world. This program was published by Times Magazine and also a journal with title Breaking Bread to Win Hearts and Minds. Both articles popularized gastrodiplomacy term to many countries and provided a concept how the culinary became a tool of diplomacy. Since then, many countries are following in Thailand's trail and starting to do gastrodiplomacy as well. For example, Japan. The implementation of Japan's gastrodiplomacy was through the spread of Japanese restaurants to other countries with the program called Japanese Restaurant Overseas. This program is expected to make Japanese cuisine can be enjoyed by many people around the world. Japan's government conducts training for Japanese restaurant chefs abroad to have the same cooking standard as the chefs in Japan to provide knowledge and let them know how to make an authentic Japanese dish. The next country is South Korea. This country begins the practice of gastrodiplomacy since 2009 through the Korean Cuisine to the World campaign, or known as kimchi diplomacy. The choice of kimchi word was based on 2008 survey of 1,500 foreigners who claimed that kimchi is the best known culinary icon in South Korea. In general, there are 3 ways that South Korea does for gastrodiplomacy, namely through food trucks, TV shows, and listing South Korean culinary system to the Michelin Guide. This movement considered effective to be able to introduce Korean cuisine widely. From the 3 countries that I mentioned, we can see that each country has its own style in promoting their signature food at international stage. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the benefits that can be reached from gastrodiplomacy. First, it can be a tool of diplomacy. If a country and another country do gastrodiplomacy to each other and they both get good result, then the cooperation between those countries can continue to be well established, not only in terms of food culture, but also in the wider field. Tourism sector is also affected by gastrodiplomacy. The countries that I mentioned earlier have proven that the success of gastrodiplomacy can affect the number of foreign visitors to their country and able to increase the country's income. Gastrodiplomacy is also capable in boost exports of food and beverage products. If the demand of the food from overseas is high, then the economic growth of home country will also increase, and it will give good impact for the people who are involved in this industry. There are a lot of positive effects for the countries and society that can be obtained simply just by popularizing their signature food. I will end this presentation with a quote from Deborah Cater. You have to taste a culture to understand it. I personally agree with this statement. We can't judge a country only by its cover, but we need to go deeper to find out what it really looks like. One of the easiest ways to learn about a country is through its food, because somehow food is a basic human need, and I don't think anyone will refuse to try food that is new or unique for them. Many countries eventually took a chance from this reality to achieve their certain purposes by showing their signature food and gaining advantage through gastrodiplomacy. That's all from me. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.